Hello, welcome back to the Weapons of War podcast. And as usual, I'm your host, Eden Chironde. Today, we are going to look at what was termed as the true face of the climate change catastrophe narrative. This was I pick up this discussion from the podcast of The Diary of a CEO. It's a wiki podcast hosted by the rich entrepreneur and investor Stephen Bartlett. And this particular episode was uploaded or published last Thursday, August 20th. They discussed a number of topics, a number of subject matters, but I want to narrow it down on the climate and the discussion they had regarding energy and climate change. So perhaps to back up a bit why I'm interested so much in that is because Uganda itself just signed the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Act 2026 into law. So that act was signed on April 29 this year, 2026, by the president that is there to regulate, how we use energy and the use of efficient energies in Uganda. And I have done, episodes about that. Why I'm not so much into the regulation of how people use energy. Now, I'm not exactly against the energy transitions in particular sectors here and there. Like if you can get people off the heavy dependence on firewood and then you get them something cleaner or something easier and more efficient and affordable, that would be better for everyone because we need to retain our forest cover. But I'm against the transition of from like overhauling of a national grid and then going for these solars and wind turbines, putting them in various places, get off fossil fuels, get off fuel, get off petrol, get off diesel, get off this, coal, don't use that. So that we are only the entire country is reliant on solar, or industries are reliant on wind. Why I'm against that is because it has failed elsewhere. We looked at examples of Germany and the UK that have tried it and their economies keep tanking and tanking. Germany, once Europe's economic powerhouse, is now been in a 2-year recession. They have so far invested over 500 billion euros in that energy transition and they are reaping zero or negatives. It even led to their current chancellor stating that Germany has undertaken the most expensive energy transition. All this is because of combating climate change. So now you understand why I took particular interest in that very section on the podcast when the panelists started discussing the correlation between energy and climate change. The guests were, or the panelists on the podcast were Constantine, a political commentator, and then there was an economist, Steve King. But perhaps to back up a bit, I want to set a stage for you before I play for you a clip that we are going to discuss. To set the stage for you here is that they were discussing, when it came to the economy, they started to discuss or to compare the US economy and the UK economy, or particularly England. And they are looking at why is the US doing better than the UK. The economist, uh, Steve King, answered or opined that why the UK is doing badly is because the government is not spending enough. He called for more government spending, no cutting back. Why? That because when the government shrinks its spending, then the citizens have little money to spend and therefore economic activity slows down. So he was for more spending on things like infrastructure, on things like welfare, on things like education, like spend and spend and spend more so that you revive the economy, so that there is economic activity. That was his view. That in fact, he even mentioned that to start a business, someone has to get into a debt to start a business. So that was his point that the problem that the UK has, it is yes, indeed a spending problem, but they are not spending too much. They are spending very little. Therefore, he called on the government to spend more. The other panelists, Constantine, replied that is not so much against government spending, that he wants government to spend on things that generate productivity, things like infrastructure. He was not exactly for increased spending on things like welfare, because welfare is where people are given free money for this, free money for that. So he was like, welfare breeds a culture where people are used to taking and taking and taking, and they're not creators. They just sit back, they know the government will take care of this, the government will take care of that, and they are takers and takers. So for him, it was against that kind of culture. So he was for yes, government increases spending, but in particular sectors that generate productivity. Okay, even sectors such as energy. When it came to the issue of energy, why he was so much into the investment, more investment in energy, is because of the economic tourism that states that the more energy is available in abundance and is cheap, the more the economy grows. Once the energy is not in abundance and is expensive, the economy tanks. That the growth of any economy always follows the availability of abundant and cheap energy. So that's why I was calling for the UK to invest more in energy. Okay. But of course, when the discussion got to energy, still that's the then question: should the UK then think about drilling in the North Sea? Drilling in the North Sea. Why is he asking about UK drilling in the North Sea? It's because in 2019, UK passed a ban or implemented a ban against drilling oil. Yeah, even if they have oil reserves, not drilling. At the time, they are saying earthquakes, but of course, we know it was down to climate change. So they stopped all manner of drilling. And in fact, UK has dropped from 18 refineries in the 1970s down to only 4 operational major refineries today. From 18 refineries to only 4. And even those 4, they are working or operating under very stringent measures, especially the taxation that in fact, it was estimated that the taxation some of them pay annually can range up to about 400 million pounds. Now, when you consider 400 million pounds in annual taxes for drilling, some are saying it's competing with their annual payrolls. Again, so it is very, very prohibitive to drill in the UK because of the stringent policies they are put in place to combat climate change. So that's where the moderator is coming from. Then with the UK economy tanking, and we know that if we produce energy in abundance and it's cheap, the economy will revive. Should we then think about drilling in the North Sea? There is oil in the North Sea for the UK. And that's where I want us to pick the discussion from.
Steve, when you say we need to reduce energy, do you mean the UK?
I mean the species. I mean human species.
So how does Andy Burnham do that?
We are not set up to deal with this problem because we're broken into nation states. We can't make decisions that affect the entire planet.
So we need world government to reduce world energy consumption.
We're going to be stuck with that, yes. We're going to be stuck with it.
Well, see, I'm glad we're having this conversation because at least this is the first time, and I mean this in a genuinely respectful way.
Yeah.
It's the first time I've ever heard anyone be honest about this issue.
Yeah.
That's what you want. You want world government.
No, I don't want it.
You believe it's
It's
inevitable.
inevitable.
It's
because
inevitable.
by ignoring this problem, we've got to the scale.
You believe it's inevitable
existential threat
that
to our
we have
species.
a world government that reduces world energy consumption and therefore the prosperity of everyone living on the planet.
And if we had taken the advice of the limits to growth 50 years ago, we would not be having this conversation.
Good.
Okay? We have delayed for half a century.
Is there any solutions that you believe are actually possible?
No.
No.
There we go. You've done a public service here because you have showed what it is that sits underneath all the conversation about climate. It's a best case scenario, people who know there's nothing we can do, but what we should do is flail about in the meantime, and in order to not address this issue, impoverish, not just in this case, our citizens and our fellow people, but actually the entire world. That's what this is. And the entire challenge I have to this is I don't believe in suicide for token gestures towards not solving a problem you're claiming to solve. right? We are not going to solve this problem by creating a world government and reducing energy consumption. That is never, ever in a billion years.
No, what we're going to do
happen.
instead is run into the crisis and fall apart
What
as
we're
a
going to do
civilization
instead,
in the process.
What we're going to do instead, look, there's a possibility you're correct about that, but the only choice we actually have to solve this problem is to create forms of energy that do not produce CO2 but produce GDP. Clean energy. That's what we're going to have to do. By the way, it's what we've done throughout history.
And we need to make that clean energy more favorable in terms of the economics to India and China.
Did you need a world government to reduce usage of the horse and cart and replace it with the automobile? No, you didn't. You came up with a better technology and people adopted that technology voluntarily because it was advantageous. This is not going to be solved by making everybody poor, well, for the reasons that Steve himself articulated, but it's also not going to be solved by making everybody, because people will not do it. You say you need everybody to hold hands and sing Kumbaya and act together.
No, what I'm saying is we need to have engineers in control, and we're talking about it 50 years ago.
Engineers in control.
Engineers.
So we should stop having elections.
So, compared to with politicians we get, yes, I'd rather get rid of elections and have engineers running everything. They do a damn sight better job than the politicians have done.
Well, and this is why I say this is a public service, because this is the true face of the climate catastrophe narrative. We need world government, we don't want elections, and we want to make everybody poor.
And you know why?
And we've got it out in the air.
Okay,
so now I'm
going to... You notice that when Steve King is asked what should the UK do about it, was saying that, the UK is broken as a system, that as individual nations, we are broken. We can't do anything about, some of these crises we are undergoing, especially climate change, that there's nothing we can do about it. As individual nations, we are so broken. Why is he saying that? I want to back up a bit, and because we are discussing it, I'll put my opinions there. That these people, they are so good at creating a crisis, and then when they create the crisis, they create a crisis that cannot be answered or responded to in the context of individual nations. They want every crisis that comes up to be responded to in the context of the whole as a globe. Therefore, if you can't answer or respond to a problem in the individual nation, context, that means there has to be global powers that have to dictate to everyone so that they're going to respond all the same. That this crisis is too big for any nation to respond to it alone. Therefore, we need everyone to come together, and therefore we move as one. But that moving as one means that there is another government, all power above it, that's dictating where we should go, or that is dictating policy. What I mean here is that we were there in the pandemic when they started social distancing, lockdowns, curfews, masks, forced vaccinations. Do you think those propositions, those SOPs were individual country propositions? No. Those measures were dictated upon every nation by certain powers above. So a certain government or a certain cliques decided that no, this pandemic cannot be responded to, in the context of individual nations. That's why if someone came up with a COVID, hey, no, scientists first credit. Someone comes up, Tanzania says, no, first we are going to respond to it like this. The media attacks the former president, Magufuli, they're attacking, you're foolish, people are dying. But I'm happy that today we know who are telling the truth. When you took all those samples for testing, somewhere were purples, somewhere, I don't know which kind of fruits he took for testing, and they came back positive. You remember that? So these people create a crisis, and they say that this crisis cannot be responded to in the context of individual nations. They want a global system to be in charge, calling the shots, deciding when we sleep and when we wake up who can move and who can't move, creating essential workers and non-essential workers, essential systems and non-essential systems, worship places, stay at home, no gatherings. So it's the same trick they're repeating with climate change here. And this economist is saying that individual nations are broken. They cannot respond to climate change alone. So we need a certain governing body up there to bring us all together, to dictate to individual nations on how to respond, to dictate policy to the individual nations. That individual body up there is not elected by you, it's not answerable to you, and is perhaps operating on its own whims. And also, that's why I said we need a world government to reduce energy consumption. And he said, yes, he doesn't want it, but it's inevitable. You see, one world government. So this gives you a hint that this entire climate change catastrophe narrative that they are pushing is just towards one end, an end of creating a one world government. A one world government cannot just emerge out of the blue. It has to emerge out of a crisis that they are here to solve a certain crisis, and therefore we all beg for some people to stand up and save the world from a catastrophe. And so far today, the catastrophe that they are pushing is climate change, that we may beg and what before we all perish. Can individual nations come together? Can they sit on the round table and choose people to lead us out of this catastrophe? And he said that, in fact, he said that for it, we would prefer that instead of elected politicians, you having the power to elect who should lead you, we should be led by a clique of engineers, because engineers know it all. Remember the experts. Listen to the experts. Listen to the experts during the pandemic. It's the same script. You know? So democracy then is put on the side. You have no say on who is governing you, because the experts are done deciding for you. And then for me, when someone mentions experts, you have to ask yourself, who will the experts be answerable to? Who will be the appointing authority of these experts? What will be their composition or representation of various nations in terms of in this expert clique? Will it be down to a meritocracy? If we have these experts, will China be happy that perhaps the biggest chunk of experts are from the US? Or will the US be happy that the biggest chunk of our experts are from China or Russia? Or again, it will be down to representation. Okay, so there are a lot of things here that we need to consider, but what you have to know is that they want to keep democracy out of the way, so that we have this one world government that dictates upon us what we should do, that dictates upon individual nations because of a crisis. Which crisis? Climate change. That I love how Constantine responded to all this. He talked about, and that's why they're spreading the catastrophe. That they're spreading the catastrophe in a manner that we are dying like tomorrow. They're not just acknowledging that. It's at times okay to acknowledge that there's an issue here, but is it life threatening? But from the 70s, perhaps even before, they have been drumming up this climate catastrophe narrative. We are dying. If we don't do this, we shall be done. The earth will be no more in 10 years. The earth will be no more in 20 years. They have made various predictions of the end of the world if humanity does not take an action to curb climate change. And that's what is against. In fact, it mentions that some ladies even are not producing because of giving birth, because they're like, I mean, the world's going to end in a few years from today. Okay, they're drumming up this catastrophe, and that catastrophe. How to respond to it? Yeah, we need to cut down our energy production or consumption. But when you cut down energy consumption, the economy tanks. When the economy tanks, that leads to widespread poverty. Are you seeing the picture now? That they want to collapse economies using this crisis of climate change. How do you collapse economies? Of course, there's a lot they are doing, but one of the sectors they are attacking is energy. Collapse the energy systems of the various economies, so that those economies collapse. When those economies collapse, there is widespread poverty, because how well the economy does depends so much or entirely on the availability of abundant and cheap energy. So the less the energy, the poorer the people. Destroy the energy systems, and the economies tank, and people get poorer, because we are trying to do what? Save the planet. Now, if people get poorer and even people die of poverty and all, so who are we saving the planet for? Constantine mentioned something nice here, that This entire discussion that we're having exposed as something that very few have admitted to, very few climate catastrophe alarmists have admitted to, that this is all just towards a one world government, that they are selling it as something that individual nations cannot uh, address, that they're too broken to address, but rather we need a one world government, and that how that one world government is going to operate is to reduce the energy consumptions and spread worldwide poverty. So worldwide poverty is the only way we are going to save our planet, to state it mildly. So they are here to spread poverty. And remember, and to remind that that mantra that was posted by the World Economic Forum, I think in 2016, where they said that how they saw the world in 2030. They said that one of the things they foresaw was that you will own nothing and still be happy. So that's the goal that they're chasing, that you will own nothing and still be happy. So who will be owning everything? Of course, them. And plus, I don't know anyone who owns nothing and they're happy. But that's the picture they are selling. And they are driving us towards. So Constantine was really against the subsiding of the economies in order apparently to save the planet. So these people are doing different things. This, that, destroy, stop drilling, destroy your coal, your coal, your coal plants, destroy your energy systems, well knowing that actually they can't do anything about the climate change. That's what Steve King just admitted to, that the problem is too big. They can't do anything about it. We have reached irreversible levels. If we can't do anything about it, then why are you destroying the economy? So it's what our constitution is referred to as token gestures, not into those token gestures, society the economy, are trying to apparently to answer to, pretending to be answering to a problem that we apparently can't solve. But therein, you also mentioned something that was so important, and why as against the legislation, the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Act 2026 that was signed into law in Uganda. Why are so much against it? They said that in the past, the only thing that was done was you did not have to force people to transition from one technology to another. You did not have to force people to move from horses and the carts in favor of the automobiles. No, you didn't have to do that. The people saw that the new technology was more efficient, it was better, it was faster, and quicker, more convenient, more comfortable, and they transited. You did not have to legislate, and therefore he called for abundant cheap alternative energies so that people will transition themselves. And that's what I call for. And for years, have these solars, have these winds, have whatever alternatives that you have. When people see that they're making a saving by using those alternatives and that they are reliable and available and cheap, the people will shift themselves. You will not have to tell them that, hey, shift. You don't have to enforce it. But people are trying to do that to enforce something. No, why shouldn't we take the natural flow or the market demands of, demand and supply? If people love it, they'll buy it. So when you talk about these people driving the world towards poverty, that's a reminder of the Great Reset. That's what they promise us, that you will own nothing and still be happy. That's the Great Reset they are talking about. A reset apparently where the world needs to be reset, that the prevailing economic models are not working properly because they are driving the world towards a catastrophic end. So we need to change those economic models and then adopt these models that where energy is scarce and there's no consumption of energy, or drastically reduce our consumption of energy. Economies tank, we get poor in order to save the planet. And that is actually that's the whole instance about these sustainable development things that they talk about. Sustainable development goals. That's the whole instance. And I told you already, they coined so good words, so catchphrases that are nice. Sustainable development goals. Who can really be against sustainable development goals? They coined phrases that you cannot argue against. But what you have to look at is the implementation of these said sustainable goals. Where have they been implemented and what have been the results? Every wisdom should be judged by the results. What have been the results of the sustainability in the UK energy system, in the German energy system? What has been the sustainability there? Is widespread poverty. Industries have collapsed. What is usually my biggest issue with these narratives or these agendas that are usually thrown around, especially these days that they throw around an agenda like climate change, but the solution is usually worse than what they're trying to solve. A person comes up and says the earth is going to collapse if we don't do this, if we don't do that, but everything is leading towards poverty. Again, everything's leading towards poverty. There are studies that I think it was in 1972, limits to growth, study that was published by some experts that Steve King also alluded to, that apparently the earth were to stabilize the earth's population to about 4 billion. And now today, we are 8 point something, billion. So when you look at people talking about stabilizing the economy, and that's back in the 70s, and today the economy has doubled from, I mean, the population of the people has doubled from what they had envisaged then or projected then. What do you think they are going to do next? All this spreading of poverty is meant to reduce again the population of the world, because where there is poverty, there is death. People are poor, they can't afford medication, they can't afford even basic needs of life. What happens? So these people are also, you can watch the podcast about the podcast that was posted last week on the Dial of the Sea. Those are the ideas that the professor was forwarding, that we should have listened to the engineers who predicted these things, who told us to reduce our energy consumption in the 70s. So they wanted the energy consumption in the 70s to be reduced. Then, in the 70s, what was the state of the economy in the entire world? How much energy were we consuming globally? I don't know, but they want it reduced then. Perhaps they want us to go back to the Stone Age days. That's usually my biggest issue, that the solution they provide is usually worse than the problem it purports to address. We saw it during the COVID or the pandemic. They came up with all these measures. Kids thrown out of school for about 2 years. They're missing 2 years of school. They're people don't move. You are locking down countries. Economies are tanking. Apparently, you're fighting a virus whose survival rate among us, the biggest chunk of the demographic was in the ranges of 99%. That if they caught the virus, they had the chance of survival of 99%. But you are closing down economies, no flights, no movement, curfews, lockdowns, what masks, social distance, kids out of school, don't go to worship. All those draconian measures they put up, apparently, to address a certain situation. The far-reaching extent of how those measures affected nations, we shall never know, because no one is going to publish that research. And how people are affected by the various measures they came up with, especially for forced vaccination, we shall never know, because that research will never be seconded by any nation. So here is pretty apparent from this discussion on this podcast, the Diary of the CEO, that the goal of the true face of the climate change catastrophe narrative is to introduce a one world government, no elections, and make everyone poor. That's the end of all this climate change. But for me, more a bit also shocking was to see that when I saw that brilliant brains like Constantine and Bartlett, were there admitting that yes, there's a crisis, there's a climate change crisis, we can't run away from. I'm like, but how come you also believe in this narrative that's there? They believe that there's a crisis, but perhaps the difference between them and the professor, they don't think it is that um, it should be preached in sort of a doomsday kind of thing, but they believe that it's there. But I'm like, with all the information that is available out there, how can such brilliant minds not have come across it again? Because truthfully speaking, there's no climate change catastrophe. Yes, the climate is changing here there, and yes, it can rain there, there can be drought there, but there's no climate change catastrophe, especially as presented by these globalists. I want us to pause here and have a look at this clip by the Australian broadcaster Alan Jones, while on a certain panel discussing climate change. You'll be shocked if you have never seen it before.
What is climate change? I mean, I think the question that the young lady asked over here is very valid. Young people are highly intelligent, but I wonder whether they're being told, or which they're entitled to, all the facts in relation to this. When I asked, well, just about Alice, you've been speaking for most of the night. When I asked Tanya Plibersek, was the Deputy Leader of the Labor Party and the potential Deputy Prime Minister, was carbon dioxide the big issue in relation to climate change? And she said yes. I then said, well, that being the case, what percentage of the atmosphere is made up of carbon dioxide? What is causing climate change? Is it carbon dioxide?
Yes, carbon dioxide pollution is a major contributor.
Okay, so can I ask you, this is not a trick question, what percentage of the Earth's air is carbon dioxide?
Oh, I don't know.
And I say, hang on, you don't know what percentage of the atmosphere is carbon dioxide, and yet you're prepared to stand the economy on its head to address a problem, the detail of which you don't know. So when I then explain that the percentage of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, Alice, is how much? Alice? How much of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere?
To answer the question, Scott Morrison has said he believes in climate change and that he wants to do something about it.
Alice, how much carbon dioxide is the problem? How much carbon dioxide is there in the atmosphere?
I'm not a scientist. I don't know.
Well, hang on. If you're going to argue the case, you ought to know. It's 0.04%. And of that 0.04%, human beings around the world create 3%. And of that 3%, Australia creates 1.3%.
So from that discussion, you notice that he asks an important question that so many these climate change alarmist people don't know. He asked what is the percentage of CO2 in the atmosphere, especially if they're saying that CO2 is what is primarily causing the climate change. That is so much in the atmosphere, the more it increases, the more the weather patterns here go haywire. So if it is too much in the atmosphere, how much is it? What's the percentage of it? And this was the second time I was witnessing this, that people are there talking about climate change, and they even didn't know the percentage of CO2 in the atmosphere, of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. They couldn't even guess. But the CO2 in the atmosphere is 0.04% approximately. Of course, the higher percentages go to nitrogen, I think in the 70s, and oxygen in the 20s. Then the other smaller gases are in 0. something. So also carbon dioxide, it comes in at 0.04%. So if we think that the concentration of carbon dioxide, which is at 0.04%, is going to hurt this entire planet, if you buy that, therefore, you are beyond help, please. But that's not even the point. He said that of the 0.04%, humans are only responsible for 3%. 97% of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is caused by natural causes, volcanic eruptions and whatever, rocks, whatever it is, and all. That's the ones that cause the 97% of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So humans are only responsible for 3% of 0.04%. So humans, in instance, we are responsible for 0.0012% of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. If humans we are responsible for only 0.0012% of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, why are you destroying our economies? To remove just 0.0012% of the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, that's what is shaking the earth and turning tornadoes and hurricanes and 0.0012%. If you believe that, then please, you're beyond help. And then he gave the example of Australia. Australia as a nation is on of the 0.0012. What humans are responsible for, Australia is responsible for 1.3%. 3%, which which means that Australia's pollution as a nation is 0.0000156. Australia. So now Australia is busy also fighting climate change, fighting, destroying economies, destroying farms, doing what? To fight what? Because they contribute 0.00015% of the CO2 in the atmosphere. If they don't address it, then they are finished. Australia. If Australia is at that, where do you think Uganda stands in terms of pollution? Where do you think Uganda stands? But people will tell you, hey, there's a catastrophe. There's a catastrophe. And perhaps for me, the thing that nailed it more was that they have never, even if you say that, hey, that 3% that humans are responsible for cannot be ignored because, no, okay. But the science has never proven that if the human contribution towards this CO2 in the atmosphere, which is 3%, that if it was eliminated and people stop polluting the atmosphere, that the other remaining 97% of the CO2 in the atmosphere will not cause climate change. They have never responded to that. So humans are responsible for 3% of the CO2. So you destroy economies and their lives. Okay, you destroy their energies. Okay, switch off all the energy grids that are, stop using petrol, not drilling, shut down the coal mines. It's shut down. So the 3% has been removed. But can you prove that the 97% of the CO2 in the atmosphere will not cause climate change? I'll leave you a clip by the professor who stated this, Ian Palmer, at the end of it. But perhaps for me, this is where I want to put my disclaimer that many people, when you talk about this climate, so they say, so now should people go ahead and destroy the environment and just cut down trees and just reclaim wetlands and they just, reclaim the lakes? Is that what you're saying? That swamps should be erased and they put malls and arcades? No, it's not what I've said. The environmental ecosystem should stay. Trees should stay. Again, actually, there should be measures to plant more trees because, according to some scientists, we even need more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which will help in the greening of our planet. And are some technologies really good? Yes. With our load shedding and all that, someone will do well with solar. You have a school who will do well with solar as backup apps so that your children can keep learning and studying despite the load shedding. If you have your home, if you have your hotel, your guests may want to to keep enjoying their lives. You can't tell them there's load shedding here. Maybe you have a backup generator, that's good. If you have solar, that works for you. I'm against the switching of our national grids and getting off, stop the drilling in Hoima, stop those people that you see right. No, we can't stop the drilling in Hoima, we can't stop our mining because of a certain catastrophe that is man-made and blown out of proportion. No, we can't. But I love this discussion and to Constantine's point that it exposed the true face of the climate change catastrophe narrative. It's about the creation of a one world government, no elections, the death of democracy, and spreading global poverty. That's the instance. It's about establishment of a control system. But how do you establish a control system? There has to be a need for it. There has to be cause for it because normally people will not accept to be controlled. No, they won't. No one will walk into a control. No, but you have to nudge them. You have to persuade them. You have to coerce them, and that's what they are doing. That's why you keep hearing that we're in an era of global boiling. That the science is unequivocal. It has been confirmed. The same statements they used to make during the pandemic. Believe the science. Trust the scientists. Don't make your own research. Trust the science. Those are the things they used to tell us. And they are reading from the same script. But that's it for today. I'll return next time. The next episode, again, I'll show you from another study that this climate change thing is a hoax. I'll bring you other scientists and what they've said about it. Other prominent scientists, because usually when these narratives are playing out, there's only one side that is promoted. The other side is usually given no platform at all. Okay. And the reasons are clear. It's because they are pushing a certain agenda and they don't want it to compete in the marketplace of ideas. That's it for today. See you again next time. Enjoy this clip.
No one has ever shown that human emissions of carbon dioxide drive global warming. Never been shown. And if it could be shown, then you would have to show that the 97% of emissions, which are natural, do not drive global warming. Game over. We are dealing with a fraud. It's a scientific fraud from day one.